in Matthew chapter 18, there's an interesting story. Peter asked Jesus this question. He said, how many times should I forgive someone when they sin against me? 7 times? Now, here's what I think is going on. I think that Jesus taught about forgiveness all the time, and Peter is one of the 12 disciples that traveled with Jesus, that lived with Jesus. He'd heard Jesus speak about forgiveness. He knew that forgiveness is like a huge kingdom principle. And so I think he kind of wanted to impress Jesus with the thought that, I've been paying attention. I'm learning what you're teaching here. I think, kind of like we sometimes do. I think Peter wanted a little affirmation there, a little attaboy. And so he asked this question. How many times should I forgive when someone sins against me? 7 times? But he didn't get the affirmation he was expecting. Jesus said, Peter, you still don't get it. You still don't understand. Not 7 times. 70 times 7. Now, I don't think he meant 490 times. I think what he was trying to say is, Peter, it's not a number. It's not a number, it's a lifestyle, right? And then Jesus went on to tell this parable, this story. He said there was a king who was taking an account of all that was owed him. Now get that picture in your mind. This king is sitting down, looking at the spreadsheets, looking at the books, taking an account of all the debt that was owed him. And he came across one of his servants who owed him a tremendous amount of money. I mean, an outrageous amount of money. This servant owed the king what would be like equivalent to $20 million. I mean, a lot of money. Now, the custom of the day was if someone owes a debt that they can't pay, you could have them thrown in prison. And their whole family thrown in prison with them. And that was the custom. Now, this king, he calls the guy into court there, and he the guy's embarrassed, and he begs the king, and King, I promise I'll pay you everything I owe you. But the king knows that's not true. He knows it can't be true. This guy can't possibly pay back the amount that he owes. It just can't be done. So the king knows that he only has really 2 choices here. He can have the man thrown in prison, as was the custom, or he could forgive the debt. And this gracious king, he forgave the debt. I mean, imagine the joy that this guy who owed must have felt. I'm picturing him like just running home to tell the wife, that $20 million debt, the king just forgave it. I mean, he's excited. He's on his way home. And on the way home, he runs into a neighbor that owes him $100. And he grabs that neighbor by the shirt collar, and he's shaking him, and he's yelling at him, and he's saying, I want that money. I want the money you owe me. And the neighbor says, I don't have the money right now, but I promise you I am going to pay you. Just be patient. Just be patient with me. But this guy, he wasn't patient, and he had his neighbor thrown in jail, thrown in prison, over $100 debt. This after he had been forgiven a $20 million debt. And other people were watching. They went back to the king. They said, King, you know that man that you forgave that $20 million debt, he had a neighbor thrown in prison over $100 debt. And the king was outraged. The king was outraged. He said, get that man back in here. And they dragged the man back before the king. And the king reinstated the entire debt. And he had the man thrown in prison. And at the end of this parable, Jesus says what I think might be the most chilling words in all of Scripture. These are hard words. He said, and that is exactly what my Father in heaven is going to do to you if you refuse to forgive those who sin against you. Wow, that's a hard teaching. I mean, in this parable, a debt was forgiven and a debt was reinstated. I don't know about you, but I don't want that. I mean, I really don't want that. Without getting into any big theological debate here, I don't want to get off into works versus grace or eternal security issues or any of that. But let's be clear. Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus, who is in fact himself God, John chapter 1 tells us, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And it tells us without him nothing was created that was created, that all things were created for him and by him. And it's affirmed in other places in the New Testament as well, that Jesus is not just the Messiah. Jesus is not just someone used by God. Jesus is himself God, manifested in the flesh. Now, if it's true, which I believe it is, if it's true that God became flesh and made his home among us, and he walked this earth with human beings, and he taught, what he taught has got to be really significant. I mean, we've got to take that seriously. If Jesus was indeed God, the things he taught just weren't wrong. I mean, there's no margin of error here. I think, God knows. Sometimes we might, want to make an argument based on our understanding of what Paul's teaching, but let me tell you, I believe that Paul was a follower of Jesus. Paul has no disagreement with Jesus. Paul was not teaching something different than what Jesus taught. So without getting off into any other direction, let's at least admit this much. That for those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus, those of us who call ourselves Christians, forgiving others is not an option. This is not optional. This is part of what it means to be followers of Jesus. We forgive.